2024 NFL Draft is officially over, which means we got to jump back a year and check out my way too early 2024 NFL mock draft, see what we got right, what we got very wrong, some players that really boosted their stock that won't even be in here, and some players that tanked their stock and completely fell out of the first round or the entire draft in general, or even went back to school. So haven't seen this in a year or 11 months, and my way too early 2025 NFL mock draft will be out tomorrow. First glance, it looks to be a way better class, just not at quarterback and probably not quite at receiver. This receiver class was super stacked, but if you need help on defense, this is going to be a really, really good year in 2025, or at least it appears that way so far. So the Cardinals at the time were picking back-to-back, and the Texans obviously didn't end up finishing inside the top two. It was done based on Super Bowl odds at the time on the PFF website. And that's likely going to be what I do again for my way too early 2025 mock draft, which, as I mentioned, will come out tomorrow. So, I mean, I'm assuming Caleb Williams would be the first pick, and Drake May probably aged not terribly. Too far after that. Welcome to the way too early. Let's skip the intro here. Some of these players will end up going, but you should never do. However, the Kyler Murray contract is just so tough to get out of, and he's a better than average quarterback anyway, but that's true. A lot of people were mocking Caleb Williams to the Cardinals at #1 overall last year. I just didn't get it. The contract was so difficult to get out of. It's so big, and Kyler Murray's good anyway. It really wouldn't have made a lot of sense. Even if they ended up picking at #1 overall, they certainly would have traded. Interesting. So I had the Bucks moving up. So this would have made sense if the Bucks were actually picking, inside the top 3, because it means that Baker Mayfield didn't have a good resurgence and a great season with the Bucks like he did, and he ended up getting paid, right? And I never really fully gave up on Baker Mayfield, but obviously, of course, if you're picking inside the top 3, it means you didn't have a great season, and that was probably going to be based around quarterback play. But Baker bounced back, and I'm assuming I'm going to have the Bucks taking Caleb Williams would be my guess. And it was Caleb Williams to the Bucks at #1. So that's kind of like the first start there. And then we have back-to-back. So we had the Cardinals taking Marvin Harrison Jr. at #2. He was the first non-QB drafted. And, of course, when you're not having a trade at this point, it obviously, makes sense for no other quarterbacks to go in that top mix. Dallas Turner was the other one. Ended up falling to about midway through the first round where the Vikings jumped up for him, but also was still one of the first defensive players off the board, which sounds funny at 17. But Leatu Latu at 15 was the first defensive player off the board. I'm sure I'm going to talk about his injury stuff if he ends up making this first round mock for me, which he almost surely did. I was a huge Leatu Latu fan based off of his 2022 film. Headed into 2023, I had high hopes for him, but I don't remember thinking he was going to be a super high draft pick because of the injury stuff, which obviously, we've talked a lot about that over the past year or so. But yeah, Dallas Turner to the Cardinals. Yeah, 3 obviously seems a bit high based on where he went, but I'm not too mad about it. So the Colts ended up picking at #4 here. We kept Joe Alt in the state of Indiana. Now, he was the 5th overall pick in the draft, but of course the Colts ended up being, a little bit better than this, obviously picking at 15 as opposed to 4. And, maybe if they were in the top 5, they would have taken a tackle, but, getting Leatu Latu at 15 is pretty awesome. And then we had the Commanders going Drake May. So I felt really good about this up until a couple of weeks ago, where it just seemed like Jaden Daniels was going to end up being the guy, who almost certainly did not end up being a first-round pick here. He had a huge 2023 season basically out of nowhere as a transfer from Arizona State. And that just goes to show you, if you want to be one of the top quarterbacks selected, transfer to LSU and win the Heisman, and then you can go high in the draft. Joe Burrow, I'm looking at you as well. Olu Fashanu was the 6th overall pick. Well, the Packers at this time were inside the top 10. They ended up picking, way down the board in the first round. The Packers did end up going with a tackle in Jordan Morgan, and Fashanu was the 11th pick to the Jets. The Raiders going Kool-Aid McKinstry. Yeah, he was projected CB1 at the time. Obviously, that didn't end up happening. Didn't even end up being the best corner on his own team last year. Kool-Aid falls into the 2nd round, and he's a good player, but yeah, I just think there weren't enough other corners who, had enough hype or had enough projection or projectability at the time. So Kool-Aid ends up being in the top 10. I thought he was a better athlete, I think, at the time. And then, of course, didn't test like crazy well or anything. Didn't play crazy well in 2023. He's just a real solid player, but you can see another guy in here. Bengal King. He had probably the worst 2023 I can remember for a top projected draft pick. His 2022 tape was good. And then he got just crushed in 2023, especially against Marvin Harrison Jr. Had a terrible Senior Bowl. This year, talk more about that in a minute. But if they choose to still not go QB, Kool-Aid McKinstry makes sense. Otherwise, and the Raiders did choose to still not go quarterback. The board just didn't end up falling for them that way, as Michael Penix and Bo Nix are both in here at QB. I think I probably have Quinn Ewers as a first-round pick. He, of course, he went back to Texas. Didn't really have a great 2023. His 2025 draft projection will be very interesting. I can see any of these QBs, really. J.J. McCarthy, Quinn Ewers, Bo Nix. Michael Penix could end up being a first-round pick. You know, quarterbacks go high nowadays. Quarterbacks get drafted They sure do. Quarterbacks sure do go high nowadays. J.C. Latham ended up being the pick there for the Titans, which I think we got right. Yeah, J.C. Latham was the 7th overall pick to the Titans, so very close. But of course, you know, nailing that spot's tough when it's based on Super Bowl odds here on the Pro Football Focus mock draft simulator. But that's 2 now, right? We had Harrison Jr. to the Cardinals, and now J.C. Latham to the Titans. And I guess I could see the Rams going Jared Verse here. Has been I think I could have done that for sure. Blocker. Although, great athlete, I might have done Brock Bowers. Tennessee really could use help on the offensive line. And then I'm getting fancy, all right? At number 9, going Brock Bowers. I did go Brock Bowers. This was a rumor, like, a couple days before the draft, or maybe even leading up into draft day, that the Rams were trying to trade up for an offensive playmaker, and Brock Bowers ended up being the guy. Of course, he ends up going to 13, where the Raiders drafted him, but the fit obviously is not terrible there. And then Bears back-to-back. So Rome Odunze didn't have quite the amount of hype at this point. I could see this being Leatu Latu, I guess. I think that's a legitimate possibility. Brock Bowers to that offense, and you're playing. We'll see what we have here. Jared Verse would make sense. Chicago Bears at 10. I have Jared Verse. Yep. Monster. So, of course, the Bears do need pass rush help. They ended up drafting Austin Booker when they traded back into the draft after their 4 picks were done. But with Rome Odunze on the board, and after taking Caleb Williams at number 1, which, man, how fortunate that this number 10 projected pick turned into number 1. Really, really nice selection for Chicago. Really nice. And then Mason Smith. So, Mason Smith was awesome in 2022. And obviously with his athletics, like, ceiling, he was somebody that if they had a big 2023, they were going to end up going really high in the draft. He just didn't look like the same player after the injury. And still ends up being a top 50 pick to the Jags. So, I mean, he's a high upside type guy. He's an interior defensive lineman, not really an edge at all. But, and I think I probably mentioned that in this video. But yeah, someone still high upside, but, you know, didn't really show it in 2023. That's why he falls into the 2nd round. As we had the Patriots going with Michael Hall. Michael Hall, really great pass rusher, ended up being a 2nd round pick, I want to say, to the Browns. I think he was a 2nd rounder, somewhere in that range. But yeah, big pass rush. Kind of seems like it would be an interesting combo with Christian Barmore, who just got paid. They might have wanted more of a run stopper if they were going to take a defensive tackle with this pick. Michael Hall Jr., of course, more of a, you know, big-time, undersized, speed-rushing interior defensive lineman, but powerful hands, really fun pass rusher. Of course, he did not end up going the 1st round. As we get to the Falcons, who need a quarterback. No Kirk Cousins on the team at the time. And they took Michael Penix Jr. anyway, who ends up being the pick. Very, very good. And that's why I have one going off the board here next. It's JT Tuimoloau. Okay. Well, the Falcons obviously need edge help. You can barely see that at the top there. But yeah, JT Tuimoloau from Ohio State ended up being the pick. Falcons really need edge. They ended up, of course, you know, drafting one at one point, but obviously didn't happen in the 1st round when they opted to take Michael Penix Jr. instead. As we get to the Giants at 14. To the Falcons, they need help on the edge. I think I go receiver here. If he continues to develop, let's see what we talk about. More rush line. Taking a chance, and this isn't even necessarily Texas bias. Some of you will know where I'm going with this. Probably most of you think I might be talking about Xavier Worthy. Ooh. I'm going A.D. Mitchell. So Adonai Mitchell obviously did end up getting first round hype. They mentioned character concerns or whatever. Who knows really what's going on, but he falls into the second round. I thought it was a steal, but of course, yeah, I had my Giants going with Adonai Mitchell at 14. They ended up taking receiver. Of course, ended up picking at number 6 overall. So that wasn't, of course, ideal, but did get the receiver to a team that ended up taking one, of course. Broncos at 15. You're going to see what happens. I think I go Quinn Ewers here. I'm going with Quinn Ewers from Texas. So, of course, the Broncos do end up taking a quarterback. It wasn't Quinn Ewers. He did end up returning to Texas, obviously. And the Seattle Seahawks.
Texas bias. This is something that
could this be a QB
if he continues to develop? And then number 16, I have the Seattle Seahawks. I'm going Jeremiah Trotter Jr.
That's a bad pick. That's a bad one. Jeremiah Trotter Jr. ended up going way down the board. I mean, at this point, a year in advance, the tape study is not huge on these guys. You do summer scouting, and a lot of these guys will pop on film. Trotter Jr. had a lot of hype, but I watched him based off his 2023 film and didn't move well in space, didn't cover. That's kind of a tough projection there, but of course, didn't really know that at the time. So ends up being a really, really bad projection there, but that happens. Steelers at 17, they ended up going with a tackle, Troy Fautanu at 20.
Campbell at 18. But the
fifth year option
of Jordan Brooks was not picked up.
And Jordan Brooks, yeah, he's gone now. Leatu Latu. So, of course, the Steelers don't really need edge with Alex Highsmith and with TJ Watt. I think this might have been like a BPA. And it never hurts to have a rotation of guys, obviously, but
60 plus, but
might have been
really,
BPA
really
here
well.
for me because I love Leatu Latu.
Alex Highsmith, you could certainly use more of an edge rotation anyway. So
okay.
Leatu Latu is the pick there.
That's one of those positions that people would say, oh, we have 2 guys already. But, so many teams get a real rotation in there, especially if you're going to go like with a designated pass rusher. And I think the Steelers definitely could have done that with Alex Highsmith and then Latu and TJ Watt. And then just really rotating those guys in and getting, a bunch of pressure on the QB off the edge. I mean, could have been a really interesting mix there, but of course, their offensive line needs ended up being massive, and Latu ends up not even being close to the pick there. Does go at number 15, and then we have Bengal King at 18. Kind of tough to show on the screen here, but Bengal King at 18 did end up being the selection. Who could have predicted how bad he was going to be in 2023? And at the Senior Bowl and tested horribly. He, lost all hype. Ends up going at the back end of the 7th round of the Packers. Worth taking a chance on. Kind of like some Sean Wade type stuff, if you remember him. Jerzon Newton to the Texans at 19. Again, that's a little bit tough to see, but Jerzon Newton ended up being the pick there. Jerzon Newton, obviously, really, really good player. Ends up falling out of the first round due to some injury stuff.
Johnny.
So, would have been interesting there.
I tweeted it out, probably. I'm not sure.
Ooh, Saints go Emeka Ibuka. Couldn't resist the Ohio State connection, I'm sure. And what did the Saints do? Saints really ended up needing tackle help. Trevor Penning didn't take a step up. He's buried on the depth chart. James Hurst is now retired. Ryan Ramczyk has a big knee thing. So, yeah, tackle it was the clear and obvious pick, but not at the time. So much has changed. Chop Robinson here to the Dolphins, and they did end up picking at 21, didn't they? Ooh. I feel like I'm going to go Cam Kinchins here.
I'm sure he's going to go as high as people are thinking, just because I'm not sure he has the profile of a wide receiver 1.
That's true enough.
Chris Olave didn't really, and he ended up being, a top, I think he was a 12th overall pick, and the Saints moved up for him. So Emeka Ibuka could go earlier than this, former super highly ranked recruit as Dolphins at 21. We're going to go with offensive lineman Kingsley Suamataia to the Dolphins at 21. Again, makes sense. They need offensive line help. They end up going Patrick Paul in the second round, who may have snuck into the first round for me here. That's a possibility. But Suamataia, plenty of potential. Ends up going in the second round, right? High upside pick there for the Chiefs in real life. Ravens at 22. Of course, they ended up going with cornerback Nate Wiggins. And I could definitely see myself mocking a corner to them, and I do. Cooper DeJean ends up falling out of the first round
barely was the 40th overall pick, but Ravens did go corner, just not Cooper DeJean. I'm still surprised he fell out of the first round. Like, I get it if you're going to consider him a safety, but I thought he was worthy of going in round 1. Didn't exactly happen that way.
But it's
Chargers. Jim Harbaugh, not the coach of this team at the time, and Tom Telesco was still the GM.
Those safeties into the first round. Malachi Moore is someone.
Do I end up sneaking safety in?
Draft because
I do go Cam Kinchins there. Yeah, I mean, they certainly could use help in the back end, but it's just not something that you're usually going to typically spend a first-round pick on, especially not Kinchins, who's just not a super great athlete. That's more of a second or third round type player. I think he ends up going in the 4th round even. Nope, the Rams did grab him in the 3rd. Cowboys at 24.
Season go with Malik Neighbors from LSU.
Oh, that would have been
Very
good.
productive.
Malik Neighbors at 24 to the NFC East, to a team that, could have used some help on offense, getting a real playmaker in there alongside CD Lamb. But the Cowboys, of course, also really needed offensive tackle. I don't hate the pick for the Cowboys the way some of the fans do. Clearly, if Malik Neighbors was going to be available, he absolutely should have been the pick there. But, of course, he ends up going in the top 6. Cowboys go with a tackle at 24.
Dude, a lot of guys are saying he could be the next LSU receiver monster.
That's true.
And I have him going to the Cowboys that could use another receiver in the mix come this time next year. They do have Brandon Cooks. I don't appear to be Lance for nickel for them. Has played over.
Packers go Javon Bullard at 25. Again, another thing that obviously makes sense. This was a team that needed to upgrade their secondary. They did so, but of course not in the first round. They go offensive line, which Goody never does, never drafts O-line in the first round. They changed that up this year with Jordan Morgan and addressed secondary down the board, and boy, did they ever. A lot of DBs, especially a lot of safeties in the mix. And Javon Bullard at 25 ends up being the pick of the Packers in the 2nd round. So we got another player to team fit correct. Just obviously Bullard fell down the board a little bit. Just because he's a bit undersized. Is he a safety? Is he a nickel? Maybe he's both. But I really like Javon Bullard. I have not been shy about that over the process. I think it's a really nice pick for the Packers in the 2nd round, but got him there in the 1st.
For the top a little bit.
And then the Lions, there's no way I would have projected the Lions pick, right? Because Terry and Arnold he wasn't really on the radar at the time. I may have had a corner here. It could have been Denzel Burke.
Nickel corner. Now, it's tough to get,
but
they'll be picking. Maybe
I
it's
certainly
an edge.
doubt.
Packers over.
I certainly doubt that it's Terry and Arnold. Who do we have here? Denzel Burke, of course. Again, position to team, correct, but Denzel Burke went back to school. So he's eligible in the 2025 NFL draft next year, not this one. Braylon Trice to the Jags. I knew the athletic profile was not amazing. That's why I had him falling to 27 at the time. But hands are pretty good. Pass rush win rate guy, Braylon Trice, ends up going to the Falcons in the 3rd round. But, at this point, it's tough to project who's going to end up being a first-round guy. You really got to identify the athletes that take a step up. And Trice is like a solid guy to get in the mix, just like JT Tuimoloau is. But do those guys end up being first-rounders? They're solid picks that will probably be top 50 or top 100 guys. But, does a guy like JT Tuimoloau really end up being a top 20 pick? Like, probably not. We'll have to see what 2025 looks like, but it's really about projecting those athletes. As we have the Bills going Chop Robinson, still makes a ton of sense. They need help off the edge. They did restructure Von Miller, but Chop Robinson ends up going in the 1st round. Super athletic guy, super athletic, but of course not available here to the Bills. He went at number 21 to the Dolphins, still staying in the AFC East, and we didn't know receiver was going to be such a big need for the Bills. They trade Stephon Diggs. They don't re-sign Gabe Davis, which was the right call in my opinion, but we didn't know that at the time. And then I have the Eagles going Xavier Worthy from Texas. I would have hated this, but I'm like, if you've been on this channel for a long time, even though I don't like teams, it doesn't stop me from doing what I think could happen or will happen, because this is all make-believe. It's like, oh no, Xavier Worthy to the Eagles. I would hate that. I can't do it. I've got to do somebody else. If it's a possibility, I'll do it. And I think the Eagles could have considered this. But of course, They end up taking corner. They really ended up needing cornerback badly. And a third receiver, even with all that speed for Xavier Worthy, ends up not making a ton of sense for them in the end. The 49ers go Donovan Jackson from Ohio State. He definitely went back to school. Former 5-star recruit. It'll be interesting to see what his 2025 NFL draft stock looks like. And then back-to-back Bengals and Chiefs. So 2 AFC teams battling for it in the Super Bowl. I guess there could have been a trade or whatever, right? But I think it's all done based on Super Bowl odds. Maybe they're not going to have same conference together this year on the PFF mock draft simulator. We'll have to see. But I had the Bengals going Rocket Sanders from Arkansas. Raheem Sanders ends up transferring to South Carolina, I believe, and that's where he's going to play football in 2024, right? But a running back sneaks into the first round, but Rocket Sanders went back to school and then transferred, of course, to South Carolina. So no Raheem Sanders in this draft, but I did try to get a running back off the board. Of course, we know now the Chiefs took Xavier Worthy, who is no longer available.
Next year, I know everyone's going to want
Let's see what they had
for him, and it certainly could be, or Travion Henderson, one of these Big Ten backs.
So Travion Henderson ended up going back to school. Blake Corum wasn't anywhere near the first round. I never understood why people had him going in round 1. It didn't really make any sense to me. But, you know, that's probably what you can say about Braylon Trice or somebody like that as well. Like, good player, solid college player, not really a first-round type of guy. Do I talk up Trey Benson here?
Tried and true, and getting
ended up being the second back off the board.
Very, very good player. It's tough to get these RBs in. I can't choose,
That's true. Donovan Edwards went back to school. Henderson back to school, obviously. Braylon Allen didn't go close.
5 of them. But I do think there are at least 5 very good backs in this class with Rocket Sanders, Trey Benson, Donovan Edwards, Blake Corum, Travion Henderson, and Braylon Allen. I really don't know too much about Bucky Irving to this point. I'm sure that will change in 2023. And then the last pick of this first round, left some of these QBs on the board. Showed my Texas bias by taking Quinn Ewers before J.J. McCarthy or Bo Nix or Michael Penix.
So that is a big thing. 3 QBs that end up going in the first round I have unlikely to be in this first round. I'm sure I'm not going to have the Chiefs going quarterback. But, yeah, Penix, Nix, and McCarthy all ended up being first-round picks. I think I thought McCarthy was going to end up going back to school, and I never would have projected Nix or Penix in the first round. But teams really needed QB. Didn't end up happening.
TVD, Spencer Rattler. It is what it is. Chiefs at 32. I've got a very, very fun pairing here. I am unfortunately leaving Rome Odunze on the board. He could be a first-round pick for sure.
Yeah, he sure could be. Odunze had a killer 2023. So he was a guy I had projected outside of the first round at this time, who ends up getting not only into the first round, but into the top 10. Am I going to go Troy Franklin for a deep threat?
Polo Fatui. I'm going Johnny Wilson from Florida State.
Johnny Wilson.
He's a 6'7" wide receiver. He was a transfer.
That's
from
Arizona State,
I think Arizona State.
That's a tough selection. I mean, he does have big-time potential, but again, probably was never going to be a guy that went in the first round. He is a good athlete. He tested quite well, but Johnny Wilson in round 1, obviously it's easy to say now, like he should have gone. Even Troy Franklin, right, who ends up going nowhere close to the first round, or Rome Odunze, obviously. Johnny Wilson over Rome Odunze in the way too early mock draft. I mean, we had a lot of names in there who ended up being top 50 picks, like Caleb Williams, Harrison Jr., Dallas Turner, Joe Alt, Drake May, Olu Fashanu, Kool-Aid McKinstry, J.C. Latham, Brock Bowers, Leatu Latu. A lot of these guys went back to school, like Emeka Ibuka and somebody we talked about earlier. But
pretty productive in 20.
Donovan Jackson, Raheem Sanders. It's not the worst. Quinn Ewers went back to school. So did JT Tuimoloau. It's not the worst. But, I mean, it definitely could have been better. But a year out, I'm not too mad about this. Yeah, we got some good comments here. Could you imagine a world where Malik Neighbors and Rome Odunze were ranked behind Johnny Wilson? That is an especially tough look. I don't think Neighbors was, right? Unless I just drafted Neighbors ahead of Johnny Wilson, where it was projected on the PFF big board. That's a possibility. J.C. Latham was a Titan. But yeah, I mean, this... When you look at it like with Scorps, this draft class looks 100 times better than this year's class for 2023. I can't wait. 2 generational quarterback prospects, which I still feel really good about Drake May and Caleb Williams. a wide receiver prospect that rivals Jamar Chase level hype, and it's more so. Harrison Jr. ends up having more than Jamar Chase, and Brock Bowers. Now, of course, he drops the ETC, because that's kind of where it ends up drying up a little bit, right? You can just say it, etc., but the defensive guys in this class just were not especially good, and they are in 2025. There are a bunch of really good players. It's not only just front seven, but the corners and safeties are going to be really, really good as well. So it's going to be a pretty fun 2025 class. But yeah, we'll see what happens. My very early, way too early 2025 mock draft comes out tomorrow. Make sure you're subscribed for that. And let me know how you think this one was a year later down in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take it easy.